So welcome to the next episode of the Tearsheet Podcast. We call this type of episode a deep dive. That's where we speak to a Tearsheet journalist to go a little bit deeper behind the research that went into a recent Tearsheet story. Joining me on the podcast today is Sara Toth Stub. She wrote a very interesting article last week called Challenger Banks Aim to Go Big by Going Local. Sara, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So I thought this was a great story. Not only, the fact that we worked on it together, but I actually think it's one of those ideas that, like, when we think of challenger banks, we think of the Revoluts and then 26, and these guys are, they have aspirations for billions of customers. You found sort of another subset of banks that have different types of aspirations. Can you talk about like sort of what prompted the story?
Yeah, sure. I guess I just noticed some news items with the growth of challenger banks in Europe and the U.S. and Australia. I noticed that there were several of them that seemed to be opening up to serve local or relatively local small and medium businesses. And I thought that was very interesting, especially a Scottish banking startup called Albico, based in Scotland. And they're aiming to serve businesses only in Scotland and in the northern part of the UK. And it's interesting because in theory, they could easily reach people all over the place, but they really, and they're not, because it's all digital. So I thought that was an interesting way to look at it. And at the same time, I noticed a few news items out of the U.S. about community banks. More community banks opening in recent years after not any really opening for quite a long time after the financial crisis. So I just wanted to see if there was similarity in that. And it seems like a lot of the things driving the opening of the handful of new community banks in the U.S. was also a desire to serve the local market or to serve a niche market, because people were feeling that big banks were not providing everything that customers needed, and that was a similar mentality with what we see in challenger banks, even those who do want to reach a large and widely geographic audience.
So can we talk about maybe give us some real life examples of some of the companies that you found that are taking that sort of niche or local focus?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned this Scottish banking startup, Albico, and they're catering to small and medium businesses, or they plan to. They actually do not have their banking charter yet, but they hope that they're close. Small and medium businesses in Scotland and the northern United Kingdom. And the bank will not have branches. Everything will be digital, but because they are serving a limited or localized audience, there is the opportunity to meet personally with someone from Albico. If a potential client wants to actually meet face to face with someone, they can also set that up. So that's sort of how they're combining this sort of old world of banking with the new world of digital banking. And the CEO talked about how they're sort of bringing the best of both worlds together. And then in the U.S., which of course has fewer challenger banks at this point than the UK, mainly for regulatory reasons. In the US as well, I spoke with a couple of examples. I spoke with a recently opened Carolina State Bank, which is working to serve local businesses. And I guess it's not a challenger bank in the most extreme use of that word, but it is a new community bank, although it has a strong digital presence. And, they know that a lot of their customers may be online only, but they're working to serve small and medium local businesses that they feel their needs are not really being met by the larger banks that are in the area. So that's sort of how. Those are a couple of examples. And then even if you look beyond that I spoke with a company called Joust. And they're, I guess, a more typical example of what someone may think of when they think of a digital first challenger bank, because they are online and digital first, and they are looking to serve a global audience, or at this time, they're looking to serve a global audience. In the future. Right now, their users are mainly in the U.S., but they're also trying to carve out a niche and form personal connections with their client base, which is mainly freelancers. So they may be looking for a national and even eventually global reach, but they're still sort of viewing it in a specific, through a specific sort of community lens. That not only are they providing banking services, but they also hope to, the CEO who I interviewed, Lamine Zarad, he mentioned that one of the things that they are focusing on is helping these freelancers. We see more and more of them in the economy today, helping them develop their sense of identity, which is part of building a community. And they have some special services for freelancers, including something called Pay Armor, which means that if someone is an established client with Joust, and every month they're getting invoices paid to them for their independent contractor work, if one time one of those invoices is late being paid, Joust will take over and actually make the payment, and then collect the money later when the late payment eventually arrives. And this just gives a sense of security and confidence to people working as freelancers and independent contractors. So that's their story.
So that's so interesting. Like, I understand Joust, it's got this niche offering for freelancers. And from a product perspective, they need help getting paid on time. I assume that's a big problem for freelancers and solopreneurs. What about on the community bank side, Sarah? Like, what offerings, if a community bank decidedly stays focused on serving a local community? You mentioned, maybe meeting face to face is one thing they can offer. In your research, did you find anything in the product set that they were offering things specific to their local communities through that digital offering?
So one of the banks that I spoke with, I believe it was Carolina State Bank, they are offering, let me see, I forgot what they call it, but these ATM machines, these standalone ATM machines that are not, what?
Interactive teller machines where there's video?
Yes, interactive teller machines. So basically what that does is it allows a client to speak like the way we would speak on FaceTime or Skype, to connect with an actual banker without having to go to the actual branch of the bank and wait in line. They're able to use this technology, and that again goes back to the idea of forming sort of a personal relationship with the banker, whether that's because they want to make a withdrawal and they want $5 bills instead of $20 bills, or if it's just to discuss something more complicated, like getting a loan for the business that they've been running or the business they're thinking of starting. And again, the advantage is that the person is local and understands the local community, and the banker could have some insight and maybe offer some advice, maybe have some insight into what business they're doing, which could influence the terms of the loan or whatever other financing or thing they're planning.
So one of the things that I appreciate in the article that you wrote was like sort of this challenge. I'm using challenge incorrectly, but the pressure on the community bank, right? So they're being squeezed by the big nationals, and they're being squeezed by these new digital banks. What are they doing to compete? How are they using technology, I guess, to stay relevant and compete?
So that's a good question, and this is something I was interested in as well. So some of them, like the big banks, are using technology, obviously offering online banking, ways to check your accounts online, basic things like that. But beyond that, something that I found that was quite interesting was a lot of these fintech startups, including Joust, these challenger banks or neobanks, a lot of them actually don't have their own banking charter, because that is quite complicated to get in the U.S. for regulatory reasons, for logistical reasons, to have the FDIC insurance and bank charter. That's a long and difficult process. So what a lot of startups like Joust do is they don't actually obtain that for themselves. What they do is they partner with either one to a handful of often smaller and often community banks to actually process and hold their deposits and their accounts. So while the user will be using a platform, for example, the Joust platform, the actual money will be moving along the traditional lines of being deposited and kept in certified banks. Many of them have been around for many years. So this is a good opportunity for small banks, because maybe they don't have the money to invest in the best new technology or the most user-friendly technology, but something they can do because they're small. And because they're small, sometimes that means that they are more nimble and maybe there's less bureaucracy or whatever to make changes. They're often a good candidate to partner with a fintech startup to actually handle the nuts and bolts of the banking, sort of the back end of it. And in fact, Joust also told me that there's a platform called Stone Castle, and what they do is sort of disperse the money that people keep in Joust. They sort of, through Stone Castle, they disperse that and deposit it in up to, they told me about 900 small banks across the U.S. So yeah, behind some of the biggest names in fintech startups, there are these small and local banks that a lot of people may have no idea are actually involved in some of the most forward-thinking ways of finance and banking.
That's a really interesting point. And so, do you see that as sort of a model for future collaboration, sort of these ecosystems of small community banks partnering with technology firms and sort of getting the best of both worlds?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think more and more small banks are doing that. And when I spoke with the CEO of Joust, he mentioned that it's almost, it's a great fit because the community banks or small banks or independent banks, it's different than working with some of the national giants like Bank of America or something. Now, fintech companies do work for them for sure. But a lot of times, because the startup itself is small, it's good to pair up maybe even with a local bank that's geographically near where the startup is located. So it seems like both sides, the startups and the small banks themselves, are doing this more and more.
Sara, thanks for joining us on the Tearsheet Podcast today.
Okay, thank you for having me.